Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel.
All right, if you would like to be the first debater, get to the seat in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, it's nice to meet you.
Likewise, how are you?
Doing well. So I'd like to know more about why you believe that and where that comes from.
Sure. So when I make a claim about the Jewish people, it's never against another population. When I'm saying that the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, it's where we come from. If you dig in the land, you find our history. This is the land that our ancestors have come from. We've maintained a constant presence, and thankfully we were able to come back to that land freely.
Sure. Would you identify yourself as a Zionist?
So I'd say that there are many different thought leaders that were involved in the modern political movement called Zionism, and that there are many different branches. The right-wing Zionism, left-wing Zionism, secular Zionism, religious Zionism, even Christian Zionism, which I'm completely against. But the fundamental idea of Zionism, which comes from the word Zion, which means Jerusalem, is the idea that the Jewish people should have a right to self-determine on their ancestral homeland of Judea/Israel. So do I believe that the Jews should have a right to come back home? Absolutely, I do.
Sure. So I was also wondering why, because this is a debate about pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel, I was also wondering why you believe that indigeneity plays a role in pro-Israel, actions.
For sure. So to define indigeneity first, if the United Nations actually defined it for what is widely accepted in academic spaces, which is that your identity is the pre-colonial identity that was born and rooted to a particular and specific piece of land that is essential to that people's identity and way of life. They've maintained a constant presence in that land, and they collectively identify with this term. And the reason why it's so important to speak about this is because there are a lot of people who claim to be pro-Palestinian, who use Palestinian struggles in order to try to delegitimize my ancestral connection and my right to live there. So I'm for the right for other people to live there as well. But when people are trying to delegitimize who I am and the collective that belongs here as well, that's when I have a problem.
Okay, so here's sort of where I'm coming from. From what I understand about indigeneity, it is a concept just like intelligence, love, which means that it can be essentially defined by what it is, but not necessarily, it's more difficult to define what it isn't. My understanding of indigeneity, that it has relation against colonialism. Also, similarly, my understanding of Zionism is that, especially through settler action, we know that it is a colonial project. So it's very difficult for me to understand how you can be both indigenous and the colonizer.
So I look at Zionism as an anti-colonial movement, a movement that the previous colonizers that were here were the British, firstly being the Romans that colonized the land, renamed it to Palestine, and kicked out the majority of the Jewish people.
Sure.
Then we have the Byzantine Empire, we have the Caliphates, we have the Ottomans, and eventually we have the British.
Does that have any say on the Jewish Palestinians who exist, who are not afforded full citizenship? What happens to them? Because Palestinians aren't a monolith, and we
Palestinian
understand
are not receiving full citizenship. And I
well,
don't know.
if you're Palestinian, then you don't have full
So
citizenship
we're not
in the
talking
state of
about
Israel.
Jews. Right. So we're talking about now the consequences have happened after the British were here.
Sure.
And the way that British colonized.
Do you think that?
Let me just
do you think
answer
that their
that part.
citizenship is a direct action of the British?
No, I think that the division of the land is a direct consequence of what the British did to our populations.
Okay.
Let me explain where that comes from.
Okay, we have to pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Sure.
Please return to your
Just
seat.
getting good.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Baruch Hashem.
So I want to start with something I wrote that you said. You said, return of the people to the land and indigeneity is pre-colonial identity. You were identifying the Jews being indigenous, and that's why they were not practicing colonialism. It was pre-colonial. Would you agree with how I described your sentiment?
So the idea that the Jews should have a right to return to their ancestral homeland is a decolonization movement, not a colonization movement. Now, we can criticize certain policies the government has, the IDF has, and I might even agree with certain things. There's a lot of criticism that I have of the current structure. But by its nature, it is an anti-colonial decolonization movement.
So there are words in Hebrew that were used pre the creation of the state of Israel that mean to settle, to colonize. And they were used in the correspondence of Ben Gurion, the Lehi, and it was very clear that they were using language. It's to settle, to colonize. If they believed themselves to not be colonizers, why were they directly using this language back then?
Back then, what that term meant was development of land. So if you read Herzl's writing, he talks about that the native inhabitants are the Jewish people. There are other inhabitants, what we call today as Palestinians, who live there, and we should live together with them. And the use of the term colonization then, because obviously today it's not a popular word, we're all against this idea, then meant development of the land. So you have to also understand the context in which words are being used, because words are sounds coming out of our mouths,
Do you
and the meanings
recognize,
have to do.
that right now, because the world, the West has now recognized that colonialism is bad, we are saying, oh, we don't identify with that language. That language meant something back then, and it was used for a particular reason.
And it means different than what it means today.
You dissociating yourself, or Israel dissociating itself from that language, does not erase the preconditions that it existed, the plan that it was trying to achieve.
The plan that it was trying to achieve is to bring back sovereignty to the indigenous population. When you dig in this line, you find Jewish history. This is where we come from. Now, there are individuals that use the term colonization because then it was very popular. And it didn't mean go and exploit another population, take away their resources, exploit it back to a motherland. That's not what it meant then. That's what it means today. And so back then it meant the development of land. We both agree.
Development of land is exactly colonial language, and it's being used today consistently. This language is
if you are an
consistent.
indigenous person and you want to develop your land, that's not colonization. It is colonization or not
If
colonization.
people existed in that land
dependent-
prior to you going to develop that land, they are also
but the
indigenous
Jews had a
to that
constant.
land.
The Jews had a constant presence, and I didn't make an argument
The
against
Jews did have a
Palestinians.
concept.
I'm not making an argument against Palestinians.
There were
I'm making
Jews
an argument that the Jews
coexisting with
are indigenous
Palestinians,
to the land
with
of Israel.
Arabs, with
And
Christians.
I'm all for that.
And they existed.
I'm all
but
for
what
that
happened?
coexistence.
The development meant erasing all of
No,
that.
the
Meant
British-
erasing their identity of indigeneity
This
as
is what I
well.
was
It was
sa-
just Jewish
This is what I was saying
indigeneity,
in my
just Jewish supremacy.
This is what I was saying in my previous point. Okay, the way that the British colonized every single region is they divided and conquered. We can see the consequence of that between Pakistan and India. We can see that in Afghanistan. We can see that in Nigeria between the Igbos, the House of Fulani, and the Yoruba.
we can see that in Israel
And we
as
can
well.
see that absolutely, where they
Yeah.
convinced the Israeli population that Palestinians, the Arabs, and Muslims were all their enemies. Hold up, and they convinced the Palestinian and Arabs that the Jews were just an extension of European colonialism, which you're falling into. And unfortunately, we fought a war
The
in
British-
1948 for which I was not there, and the consequences of that war and the several wars that happened after is the situation that we're in
So
today.
you're saying that the British had a plan of colonization and that Ben Gurion, Herzl, and every person, or Shamir, the leader of Lehi, who actually reached out to Hitler to work with Hitler to start, you're laughing. Maybe you're not familiar with it.
I'm very
But
familiar
the president,
with the
the
Zionists
leader,
reaching out to the Nazis in
No,
order
but
to
the
get them
leader-
to let the Jews leave so that they wouldn't
the
kill them.
leader
Not
of
to have
Lehi, who
anything
became
to
the
do.
prime minister of Israel,
And?
had correspondence, reached out to Hitler and asked for my enemy to work with me to take over the land of Palestine, to take
the
over
British
Israel.
were the ones controlling the mandate of Palestine at that time.
Exactly.
Not
so
the Nazis.
the Lehis,
When
the
the
Lehis
Zionists-
were willing to
when
work
some-
with Nazis
No, they were not willing to work.
colonize
They were trying to
Israel.
get their people out of what was being controlled by the Nazis. If you have a hostage taken
wait,
by,
excuse me, I
if
just
you have
wanna check.
someone that takes
You're-
a hostage,
you're claiming-
going to negotiate with them to get them
This
out
is
of
so
there.
interesting.
So
You're
the Zionists.
claiming-
Wait, let me finish my point because
I
I let
just
you
wanna-
finish.
I
yours.
just wanna ask.
I
You didn't
understand
let
that
me
wanna-
finish. You were
I
speaking the
did
entire time.
You asked the question and I get to answer. Okay. You talked about the fact that the Zionists had relations and contact with the Nazis. This is true. The Nazis had colonized and not colonized, occupied.
exactly, I agree.
Yes, the Nazis had occupied
Yeah.
the European area, and the Jews were under their authority. So the Zionists wanted to get the Jews out of there so
The
that they
British
wouldn't
were
be
Nazis?
killed.
The British
No.
in Israel and Palestine
I'm
at that
talking
time.
about the Nazis in Europe. They had taken control over Europe, and the Jews realized that they would be killed. So the Zionists tried to negotiate to get the Jews out. This has nothing to do. You're mixing a whole bunch
You
of
are
things
mixing
to
facts
come
up.
to
You
a
are mixing-
conclusion.
Pause there.
creating-
Sorry, we have to pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.